Good afternoon and welcome to Invest Precision Medicine. I'm Stephanie Baum, Director of Special Projects. Thank you for joining us for our panel discussion on non-dilutive funding for life science startups. This will be a conversation on non-dilutive funding sources for predominantly biopharma and medtech startups, from government research and industry grants to industry partnerships. The speakers will explore funding opportunities available on a local and national level, as well as the expectations associated with these funding opportunities. Moderating the discussion on this panel is Stephen Nappi, Associate Vice President for Technology Commercialization and Business Development at Temple University. He joined Temple University in 2008 and has been in the business of building technology transfer programs and commercializing university discoveries for the past 20 years. When he joined Temple University, it was initially as its Director of Technology Transfer, but in his current role, Stephen heads the university's effort to identify, protect, and commercialize research-based discoveries while creating an ecosystem that supports technology acceleration and startup creation. Prior to joining Temple, Stephen spent 7 years at Florida Atlantic University in its Office of Technology Transfer. Welcome to the panel, Stephen. Also on the panel today, we have Tom C.C. Hugh, Interdisciplinary Scientist and Project Officer with the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. He works in the division of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear countermeasures at the Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, or BARDA, U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. At BARDA, Tom oversees contracts for the division of chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear countermeasures and detection, diagnostics, and devices infrastructure division. He joined Health and Human Services as an assistant professor of radiology and director for the small animal imaging program at the Medical College of Georgia in March 2009. Prior to that, he was the National Institutes of Health as an intramural research Training Award Fellow. He also worked as a principal scientist with GlaxoSmithKline. Welcome to the panel, Tom. Also on the panel, we have Tiffany Wilson, President and CEO of University City Science Center. Tiffany brings more than 18 years of leadership transitioning innovative medical technologies from benchtop to bedside, building partnerships across academia, industry, and economic development organizations. She most recently served as CEO of the Global Center for Medical Innovation, an Atlanta-based nonprofit dedicated to supporting the development and commercialization of innovative medical products. Tiffany served as the National Advisory Council on Innovation and Entrepreneurship of the U.S. Department of Commerce. She was recognized by Inc. magazine as one of the 17 inspiring women to watch in 2017, and one of Becker Hospital Review's 110 women in medtech to know in 2017. Welcome to the panel, Tiffany. And last but not least, we have Kelly Wylam, Director of Innovation Partnership with Ben Franklin Technology Partners. Kelly has over 28 years of experience with a variety of businesses and economic development programs in Pennsylvania. In her role, she directs the Innovation Partnership, Pennsylvania's premier SBIR STTR statewide assistance program. She advises clients and supports the Innovation Partnership network of more than 18 member organizations with over 75 locations throughout the Commonwealth. In her previous capacity with the Department of Community and Economic Development's Office of Technology Investment, Kelly managed the Commonwealth's Pennsylvania Initiative for Nanotechnology, provided oversight for the Ben Franklin Technology Development Authority's university grant funding and Keystone Innovation Starter Kit programs, and worked with technology-oriented businesses seeking funding. Kelly Wylam has also worked at DCED in the business financing area, managing pooled bond financings and small business lending, and grant programs. Welcome to the panel, Kelly. And before I hand it over to Stephen, I just would like to remind the audience that if you have any questions of the panel to ask, please drop them in the chat. And please stick around to the end of the panel discussion, because the speakers have agreed to make themselves available to take direct questions asked in the chat of them. If you just drop them in the chat, then hopefully it'll be the beginning of a good conversation. And now I'll turn the panel over to you, Stephen.
Great, thank you, Stephanie. And thank you, MedCity News, for the opportunity to moderate today's panel on non-dilutive funding. Now that you're familiar with the panelists, let's start to get a window into their organizations. So in my role at Temple, we have a regular stream of new startup opportunities coming in from the university's growing research base. Where a startup is a commercial vehicle to move our technology forward, non-dilutive funding is always part of our initial discussions with the inventors as well as the entrepreneurs. I'll say most of the spinouts from Temple that did not explore non-dilutive pathways come back about a year later saying they wish they did. So I think some of that hesitancy may be that the entrepreneurs have a track record in business in raising private capital, but don't really understand the non-dilutive pathways and how to approach them. So to start off, Kelly, how do organizations like Innovation Partnership help these companies get through the intersection when considering non-dilutive funding?
So we're unique here in Pennsylvania. I should state that the program I manage is specifically a Pennsylvania-based SBIR STTR assistance program. Temple University, as well as the University City Science Center, and we have 18 other partners throughout the Commonwealth that are institutions of higher education and research, as well as economic development assistance organizations who assist clients or are the entryway to identifying potential clients or interested, innovative entrepreneurs who may need this type of non-dilutive federal grant funding to move their innovation from R&D or benchtop in the research environment at the university, gain the footing and understanding of what it takes to be an entrepreneur and a business person, which is essential. And it's an essential starting point. So our small business development centers here in Pennsylvania, and as well as the small business development centers network across the United States, regardless of what state you're in, are a good starting point to organize the entrepreneurial efforts with their resources that they have, as well as the instruments that they have to do some homework in mapping out what their business plan might look like. Because regardless of how you're looking for funding, whether it's non-dilutive or it's from investors, you really need to have that grounding focus of having your thoughts organized around what it is that your innovation does, the value proposition, who your potential audience and or customers may be, what problems and solutions you're solving. Now, in defining those, right, the federal government through the SBIR and STTR program or through other grant funding programs like broad agency announcements has specific topic areas that they present to the community at large to solve specific problems that are technology related, that they're looking for solutions from in innovative ways from either researchers and or technology focused entrepreneurs. So understanding the space that you're in and your value proposition is also a grounding point or jumping off point, I should say, for taking a look at how you and your innovation align with a solution that the government is seeking.
Great, thanks, Kelly. And if I think about now an idea evolving into a company that's spinning out from a research institution like Temple, the reverse is true. Our faculty members are well equipped to seek government grants, but the world of private capital and even non-dilutive technology or business funding is new. So Tiffany, can you tell us about the Science Center and how it helps advance technologies working with many universities across the region, including those spun out from those partners?
Yeah, so all great points and insights from Kelly. So it's always great to learn from our fellow panelists. So the Science Center, we have a number of different programs focused on commercialization. and are in the midst of reimagining what those look like, given how the landscape has changed over the last decade and where some of the opportunities are moving forward. But it's all centered around this capital continuum. And how do we ensure that federal and other sources of non-dilutive funding are well utilized and invested to ensure follow-on capital on the private sector. We have a proof of concept program, our QED program, that is really focused. We're working with 22 institutions in the tri-state, Philadelphia, Delaware, New Jersey region to provide funding and business development support for these academic researchers to help them prepare exactly, what you've indicated, Stephen, where they are good at getting the R01 grants, the scientific type grants, but how do they start to position for these SBIR grants that do have more of a translational component? So what we do is have a external network of reviewers and advisors who we will bring in to help vet these ideas and assess for their commercial potential, and then provide them with knowledge, connection, tools to really position them to seek follow-on funding to really advance along the commercialization pathway. And so we kickstart things. We have a little bit of funding that we're able to award to the top companies selected, but we'll have customized business mentorship. We're very much we're not a one size fits all. And so it's really about meeting the innovator where they are and providing the support, the guidance and resources that they can be successful in the entrepreneurial journey. And I think this is something that's important for us to keep in mind as we move forward and think about all the new innovations coming out of the pandemic and new technologies, where reality, the innovators need to have the business acumen, but not everyone needs to leave academia to be a startup CEO. And so really just assessing the appetite for that individual, for each institution, and making sure that they understand that they don't necessarily have to be involved as the entrepreneur, but involved in that entrepreneurial journey and that process. And our programs at the Science Center are really designed to facilitate that.
That's terrific. Thanks, Tiffany. So now you're getting a sense of really the feeders that really help tee up and prepare technologies and companies for non-dilutive pathways. And the government is a major driver of innovation funding via non-dilutive avenues. So Tom, can you talk about those various avenues of federal support through early stage tech non-dilutive funding?
Yeah, definitely, Stephen. I believe Stephanie might drop a reference deck material into the chat as a reference for all the participants. Basically, I just want to spin off from the STIR SBIR program. So usually those folks enter into those programs will have a so-called program officer or project officers, and we typically have similar job duty or job descriptions, and they're really your best friend, right? Because they're your advocates to approach to a lot of federal funding resources. They know how to navigate the ways. So then I'm going to take a step back. Some of the programs give you like an initial taste of where we're situated. Then I'm going to like some of the different program area than the area we're supporting, both from the NIH side of things as well as BARDA side of things. So BARDA basically stands for Biomedical Advanced Research and Development Authority, resides under one of the many assistant secretaries. This particular assistant secretary is the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Preparedness and Response under the Office of the Secretary for Department of Health and Human Services. And our primary mission space is basically we'll have to provide the medical countermeasure necessity to address the public health and pandemic needs. And with that, we have our sister agency under the National Institutes of Health, and specifically NIAID, allergies and infectious disease. Basically, our sister agencies, then they usually do a lot of program announcements, non-dilutable funds, typical grants mechanism, as well as SBIR, STTR grants, part of the business, small business grants, as well as some of the tech transfers. And typically under our funding programs, there are early development partners, then they transition to the so-called through the valley of death, right? With phase 1, phase 2, and phase 3 clinical studies, usually would cover the larger chunks to move the therapeutics or diagnostic devices along the way. And there are two main funding supports from our agencies. One is someone mentioned the broad agency announcement, which covers predominantly advanced research and development. And this second piece, even larger tranche, basically is procurement of any approved or cleared device or therapeutics or vaccines. And that's called the Project BioShields. And I'm going to focus predominantly on advanced research and development because I think that's important, critical for the non-dilutable fund features. Usually that helps transition, right, early stage to the advanced stage, and that's important. And under that particular mechanism, there's a so-called easy BAA. Easy BAA basically is a quick proof of concept study as a contract, and it's up to $750,000. So significant enough to get you the proof of concept, so you could potentially enter into a competitive environment under the broad agency announcement. And under the broad agency announcement, basically that's a full-blown contract. Basically anything you need to cover through the approval or licensure process. And so that's quite important. And we fully understand a lot of early developers, they have a really good idea. They have a candidate, they don't have a primary results. And that's usually a sticking point. Even entering into a NIH peer review process becomes challenging to get that initial, right? It's a chicken and egg questions. So what we end up doing is between our colleagues at NIH as well as BARDA, we actually have different clinical network as well as non-clinical network. So for example, the non-clinical network, basically we establish a so-called task order where actually you could potentially submit a short concept paper and say, okay, we have certain therapeutics that could potentially address the current national needs. And would that be sufficient? And submit through that, go through, rather than a peer review process to Center for Scientific Review, actually reviewed by experts within NIH as well as BARDA on the government side. And we'll say, yeah, your candidate sounds great. It has a certain product profile, such as mechanism of action is sound, right? PK/PD is good, and all the things you could figure through the therapeutic development process. Then we'll test it for you. Then you actually retain all the rights for your candidates. Then the sole purpose for that is to help our investigator to generate enough information to further engage with TTR, SBIR program, as well as a broad agency announcement. So hopefully that's a relatively newer resources that's available that hopefully you talk to your program officials or project officials, then we'll be able to provide additional information on. I think our contact information is actually on my reference deck as well. So feel free to reach out and contact. And I think one more point I would like to stress is that when you present, right, you want to think about the evaluation criteria. Basically, that's how you're being evaluated. And there's three main criteria. It's the program relevance, how your project is going to align with the federal initiative, right? That's important. Then scientific merit. Scientific merit, basically, how well you do science. we're seeing a lot of proposal that comes in that they have great science, but they neglect the other two criteria. Then the third criteria is actually the capability. How are you going to develop your team so that able to help you along to be successful? So it's really a team environment. So, and don't forget to write your weaknesses, because the sooner you feel comfortable to identify some of the weaknesses you're going to encounter, the easier for the program official to help you to solve it. So it's an iterative process. I just want folks to remember it's actually a team environment. So back to you, Stephen. Thank you very much.
That's a terrific point, Tom. And I think it leads to the next topic, which is it's not always, in fact, I sometimes find there's an overemphasis on the money aspect of engaging with various programs, when in fact, there are a lot of non-financial benefits by going through the process, by interacting with the individuals at these programs and so on. You know, the common reaction is almost, what's the most I can get in terms of dollars from this particular program? And I think people miss and often never get to the money for this reason, is they're not actually getting that feedback loop installed into their way of thinking as to how they make their value proposition attractive to particular funders. So, but also how you leverage the opportunities that and the people that are in front of you with these programs. So I'm going to turn it back to the panel and have them comment on what companies and innovators can look for in terms of some of those non-financial benefits that surround non-dilutive funding. And I'll just leave it open for you guys to jump in with any comments on that.
Yeah, so from our perspective, you know, the thing is with getting these technologies into products that turn into companies that get to market, it is not rocket science, but it is a multidisciplinary sport, and it requires a lot of different expertise around the table. It's what I particularly love about medtech, where kind of bringing the scientists address a lot of these issues, you know, with a common goal of getting something into the market that's going to help benefit someone's life. And so it's been my experience really, you know, over the last 20 years, and the first 10 of which was my intro into medtech and working in medtech startups. You don't know what you don't know. And, you know, a decade ago, when I had the privilege of being brought on board to build the Global Center for Medical Innovation, it really came from that point of, who are the people that I wish I would have known? What are the things that the vendor relationships that I wish I would have had? All of these things that you're not really thinking about from the beginning, but it takes so much time to develop those relationships, to understand, to make the mistakes. And to the extent that you can access these types of programs in the world of SBIR research resources and support, to, you know, take off the table all of that time and having to do that heavy lift all by yourself, when there is a vast network of expertise tied to these SBIR and commercialization programs to be helpful. You know, my advice would be to really, you know, it's humbling, right? We have a lot of times we have to put our ego aside, and which is hard for, you know, scientists and clinicians who, you know, it's their job to know everything it is about their idea and their science and things like that. But it is, I think, 10 times more valuable in a lot of circumstances to have immediate access to the expertise and not the $150,000 that you might get up front, right? Because if you can get those experts behind you and you can build a strong business case, then you increase the odds that you're going to get SBIR funding, and you're increasing the odd that in parallel you can get equity. and combine that capital to really address the milestones that are going to position you for success in the long term.
I agree 100% with all of those points, Tiffany. I would say also, and additionally, one thing that I find in working with clients that are interested in SBIR, timing is extremely important. So, you know, I want to have, or my colleagues like you and our folks at Temple and our folks at the Science Center or Ben Franklin, you know, we want to be in touch with an interested submitter as soon as possible, because there are things that you do learn, right? So a part of SBIR and STTR is ensuring, one, that your innovation technology is aligning with the mission and focus of the institute or center at NIH, and the topic area specifically that you're applying to, whether it's SBIR, STTR, or another grant funding opportunity. So that's important. Also, as a part of that, then we want to make sure that the team is aligned. So if there are deficiencies, as we're having a discussion, learning more about the innovation, if we realize that there are some key personnel that are absent, we want to take a look at potentially making recommendations for an advisory board or committee that might be important to organize and put together to help support and enrich that actual project focused team, right? So that can take some time. Then there is all the registrations and the logistics. If you're working with the university or you're using IP with the university that's been developed at the university, ensuring that there's clearance or agreements in place to utilize the IP and or eventually purchase the IP at some point. If there's entanglements there, we want to make sure that that's clearly defined prior to seeking some funding for a project where the IP is entangled with the university. So that may take some time, right? So the sooner you start talking with economic development organizations in your state that can assist with these things, and as Tiffany said, it may be kind of a trite phrase, you don't know what you don't know, but we can only start probing for questions that are important to this whole process as we get to know all the things about your business, your interests, where you're at in moving the innovation towards commercialization, what stage of development the innovation is in, right? So all those things, not only are they important as you're pursuing either successfully or maybe not at all federal funding opportunity, but then it shores up all of these individual component pieces and enriches your team, your business for potential other investment opportunities as well. So I mean, there's a learning curve on all of it. And I think there's great benefit whether or not you actually end up applying for the non-dilutive funding at the federal level or you don't, right? There's so many component pieces that can be beneficial to explore in the process.
Those definitely are great points. I would just like to echo Tiffany and Kelly's point, and a few additional items to add on it. When you come to the advanced developer side, it's really I'll almost call it a comprehensive approach. You know you're going to go through some type of learning curve, and it's almost better as soon as you initiate it, the better you're off. So talk to your program official, talk to your project officials, and get their take. And because, like I mentioned before, we're actually in a team environment. So we're actually within our agency, we actually have probably, I would say probably more than 75% of the personnel we call subject matter experts. And by that, what I mean is they have between 20 or 25 years pharmaceutical experience or other in the industry environment experience, that we use them as an evaluator, not because they just pushing the paperwork, but they actually provide really good advice from a drug developer perspective. So we usually put the end game in mind, then we develop the so-called comprehensive regulatory strategy, because the end game is trying to see if we could get to the drug or diagnostic devices through the FDA approval or clearance process. The reason being that more than likely that's going to be the best bang for the buck, right? And giving the most benefit to the public health environment. And usually we actually work kind of backwards, develop that regulatory strategy. In each step of the way, we call the critical path. What are the shortest paths to get you from point 1 to point 2? And if you don't go through that learning curve early on, you might find yourself off track for a while before you actually goes on to the most direct pathway. And even if you're too early, don't feel that you cannot reach out to the advanced developers, because we're actually more than happy to help. Rather than making initial mistakes, we'll try to put you on the right track. So for example, if you're too early, you have even ideal stage, right? When you have an idea saying that, okay, I know we could potentially hit this particular mechanism, and more than likely this particular mechanism is going to be beneficial for certain disease area. What do you think? I have a compound, or we call it a compound, before even reaches therapeutics margin or windows. And what do you think? Then if you describe to us, more than likely, at least we could recommend to the right institute under NIH. And that's going to be very beneficial, because then you're talking to the right folks, rather than, right, you initiate the right place, you initiate under the right institute, you talk to the right program official, so that they'll help you get through your learning curve. So we're really here to help, because like within our portfolio, right, unless the investigator is successful, we're not successful. So we're the stewards of taxpayers' dollar. So we're always trying to make sure you avoid any potential mistakes. So.
Terrific. Thank you. And we were actually just having a conversation this morning about technology that did go through the Science Center in one of the programs to further advance it. And even though it didn't receive funding, we were better prepared in having a conversation that we just had with an investor to go ahead and potentially create a startup company around it, using some of the business plan and elements we created through that program, and even some of the contacts. So it is really important to do what you can to leverage all of the information, process, and expertise that's been mentioned. And I can think, Kelly, for example, even that early test, that go, no-go feedback is critical, right? Allows us, even in the no, to redirect what are critical, very limited resources at this early stage, pivot to another different pathway, or if yes, give us our best shot on goal.
Right, because time is money, right? And time is an expense, right? And it's an opportunity expense. And we don't want people spinning wheels in a direction that's not going to be productive. And
Yep.
Again, the sooner we can start revealing those directions or the interests and explore a path to a certain extent, and realize that if that's going to be a no-go, right? You can redirect that and better apply those resources. So that's really, really important. So specifically, Tom, like you said, the earlier, even at ideation phase, right? To have start having those conversations. Shouldn't be afraid to do that. Everybody that is in the space that we are all in, and our colleagues across the country are in, is helping clients, helping entrepreneurs, helping innovators, and anything we can do to make the right connections as early as possible to save time and effort, we want to do. If it's at the federal level, just one thing I forgot to mention previously was that, let's say you're looking to pursue SBIR and STTR, and we have a program manager in mind, right? And you contact them, and they might even say, oh, well, you are aligned with this topic area, but we have another opportunity that's a high priority over here that is you're a perfect fit for, and it may be a better opportunity, and it's not necessarily SBI or STTR. It's a specific offering. So I just wanted to put that out there too. It's not all just SBI or STTR or even BAAs, but touching base with the agency itself can be more than fruitful.
Kelly, I'm so glad you brought up the point of time is money, because it really is. And, so when over the last decade, when I was in Atlanta, I kind of started to think in terms, and I'm a business person by background and training in investment banking. So I think in terms of burn rate, due diligence, quality, what's going to kill valuation, and working backwards from there. And so I kind of started thinking about things in terms of $1,000 days. And so, if you're an early stage company, you're burning between $1,000 and $10,000 a day, whether you're, interviewing the right, trying to Google for the right regulatory person, contract manufacturing or whatever, and so every day that you're not making meaningful steps towards commercialization, you're potentially wasting dollars. And so to the extent that you can partner with some of these organizations and find this help and get those, have that early conversation with Tom and BARDA or the agency, you are saving time. And so, big picture, if we think about the cost that it takes to bring a lot of these technologies, all of these technologies to commercialization, how much of that is driven by people wasting $1,000 days, not getting that guidance early, having to repeat studies. And it just kind of adds up over time that really limits our ability to be competitive and getting these innovations to patients where it matters. So just something to think about from the scientist standpoint, put on your investment banking hat and think about that burn rate.
Yeah, and thanks, Tiffany. And Tom, you mentioned identify your weaknesses, and as yet another example of an experience we've had doing that, we had the program officer really then connect us to a government capability, which happened to be a lab resource that we didn't have, that can be beneficial and used for the project. And I just recently received, for the companies that are on the line, there's also technology developed by the government that is now, I'm seeing, connected to certain funding opportunities as well. So think about what you're developing as a company and whether there's perhaps something complementary that's been developed by the government as well that can help advance their technology. So be on the lookout for that angle as well. We've had sort of conversations about some of the direct opportunities with non-dilutive funding, some of the more indirect opportunities in engaging with a process. And it's non-dilutive, but that doesn't mean no obligation. Companies are sometimes caught off guard. Again, they're maybe more familiar with some of the private funding pathways, and there are a whole different set of expectations when it comes to non-dilutive funding. What are some of the expectations, obligations, requirements, key requirements that might come along with non-dilutive funding? Maybe we start with Tom. And again, think about the fact that there are different goals attached to non-dilutive funding. So the requirements are often public interest. If there's an interest in making sure it benefits society, you're going to have reporting requirements. So I'll kick it back to the panel to talk about what businesses should be prepared for in accepting non-dilutive funding.
Yeah, definitely. So BARDA is typically with a contractual mechanisms. So when you think about contract, there's always milestone and deliverables, right? So typically the milestones will be, okay, are you going to hit certain, for example, a study? You're going to develop a certain drugs, and there's a whole bunch of different gateway to your next level. Then each way, at each segue, you're going to generate so-called a study report. Basically, is that particular study going to be positive in results or negative in results, because then that helps with your go no go decision. And so that's some of the deliverables that's required. And since it's a very comprehensive team environment, we actually, if you actually successful to secure a contract with BARDA, we actually, each contract will have a whole team associated as a support. And that particular team we call the project coordination team. Basically, it has non-clinical, clinical, manufacturer, regulatory, project management, you name it, basically along the whole drug development pathway, we have a person or a subject matter expert for it. So it's a great benefit for smaller companies. If they don't have the particular personnel, they could leverage that from the government expertise. And if larger company, if they do have the personnel, they actually becomes complementary. And sometimes, as I always say, like 2 heads is better than 1. And a group of folks actually help you to generate and help you along that critical path. So there's with a team, there's of course there's a lot of obligation. Going back to your question, and there's a meeting which involves meeting minutes, the actual regulatory documentations that whenever you meet with the FDA, you have to provide official meeting minutes with the agency. And also there's a lot of reporting requirement. For example, the monthly reports or annual reports. So those kind of things. Pretty much you act as you would in a true pharmaceutical companies, right? You have to show your progress, making the decision gates, provide better non-biased results, and make the good scientific decisions to further your developmental process.
Thanks, Tom.
So I think one of the things that we need to take a look at too is once you receive SBIR, STTR funding, a couple things are important to have anticipated. One is having timekeeping, a system of timekeeping in place, extremely important. You can't do your timekeeping after the fact. You can't forget at the end of the week and log it in. Having an accounting system that rises to the standard of an accounting system that is appropriate for receiving federal funds is important. So you may not have that in place at the time of award, but you're going to need to get something in place, whether it's QuickBooks Online or what it is. We strongly encourage folks to take a look at least consulting with an accounting firm to ensure that you're doing your accounting correctly. That's really important as well. Phase 1 for SBIR and STTR funding goes really quickly. It's 8 months or 6 months to a year for the project execution. You can blink and that time goes by. There is reporting during that period of time, but obviously if you've embarked upon and received a phase 1 award, what you're really hoping to do is capitalize on that and move on to get the bigger bang for the buck and get that phase 2 award, which moves it closer to commercialization. The reporting, that's a 24-month or 2-year project execution period. So you really want to make sure that you solidify things like your timekeeping and your accounting in the phase 1 period, because 2 years, while it's quick, it doesn't go quite as quick as that phase 1 first year, 6 to 12 month period of time for that execution period. Also, timing is something that you need to have as a consideration. You know, one of the things that we like to say is first-time applicants for SBIR and STTR can expect to at least put in 150 plus hours for a first-time applicant. And that includes everything from working with an economic development service provider to gain assistance, to a professional grant writer, to your registrations, and submitting your full proposal. That would be included in that 150 hours. then you have to think about the time it takes to wait for whether or not the decision of whether or not you've received the award. Federal funding, in most cases, is not fast. It is not a quick turnaround, yes or no, you submit and you hear in a couple weeks, it's a couple months, right? So you need to be prepared for that and plan for that. So again, that's something that's really important. We like to manage expectations up front. We don't want you to be surprised what you're getting yourself into. I think that's key to most things in life, right?
That's terrific. Thanks, Kelly. And I'm going to jump right to just to make sure that we can cover a last topic and then open it up for some questions that haven't been answered. We can always come back to any additional topics if we have time. But really insights from the panel on recent shifts to non-dilutive funding opportunities, new programs, the outlook for non-dilutive opportunities moving forward. I think as was mentioned in the chat, are there legislative moves that may help or hurt non-dilutive opportunities? So I'll open it up to the panel on what to look for, either recent shifts or maybe some upcoming shifts that those in the audience should anticipate.
I mean, from my perspective, I can't talk to any specifics, but I would anticipate as part of the what we've learned over the past year plus with COVID, you know, the NIH has been funding a lot of work related to rapid diagnostics and commercialization pathways, been exercising a lot of those systems and relationships. I would anticipate continued federal funding flowing into some of those areas in pandemic readiness, you know, to assist with not only new technologies, but also economic recovery through startup creation, job creation, stimulating investment activity. And then I would anticipate, you know, we're going to see new opportunities for federal public-private partnerships tied to commercializing some of these things sooner rather than later.
Thanks, Tiffany.
And Tiffany is exactly right. BARDA actually recently announced publicly there's a private venture firm actually collaborative with BARDA. So it becomes almost a hybrid system in order to go in there, since it's non-dilutable funds. Venture doesn't have to take as much risk, and federal funding always becomes a lot easier with visibility to make sure that folks are well use those dollars for investment purposes. So there's a brand new announcement for the collaborative venture funds with BARDA. So that's one of the avenues that someone might look for, as well as some of the smaller companies. Usually, even the federal dollars, we want a company to have a stake in the game. So usually, if a company could cost share, it usually becomes a big plus, because that means you're fully vested, and sometimes could be a very small percentage. And typically we see no more than 50%, right, from the company coming in. But it's just that a little bit goes a long way, showing that you really have stake in the game. So
that's great.
The only thing that I could really offer is that just because you have an innovation that is in the medical space does not necessarily always relegate or dictate that you submit or focus on National Institutes of Health. The National Science Foundation is very broad in its focus and mission, and entertains all areas of science and furthering of scientific innovation. And DoD has many areas that are life science related as well, medical related, cancer related. So one of the things that I should note is both of those agencies are also extremely large in terms of their allocation of non-dilutive funding for SBIR and STTR and other forms of funding. So it is really important, again, that you try to interact with an assistance provider in your state to gain some guidance on how to best approach which agency is a good fit, or stage the approach in terms of maybe you're submitting to more than one agency, and what that looks like, feels like, and everything else. So I just wanted to throw that out there. It's really not anything legislative or priority focused. It's just, keep your eyes on, the work that you're doing and the space that you're in, but also realize if you're looking for this funding, it doesn't necessarily have to come from NIH. It could come from other agencies as well.
That's a great point. We have actually a startup that's in the rapid disease diagnosis area, and that funding is coming from DoD, and it's significant and very helpful to get them over the milestones that they need to achieve. Why don't we make sure that we address any questions from the audience? Please go ahead and submit, or I don't know if it looks like we've addressed any that have come into this point. Any questions from the audience that the panelists can address? While we wait for any questions to come in, pitfalls. All right. So maybe to ensure that we capture feedback, if the panelists have really key success stories and how those were constructed, or sort of the good, bad, and the ugly from the panelists. So when pursuing this pathway, give it to us. What does it look like when it's done right? What does it look like when it's done wrong? Whoever wants to jump in first.
So I could give a really good success story. I'm actually managing that particular project. I'm actually really proud of. This is a particular academic institution. The lead investigator is actually a critical care pulmonologist, and she deals with pediatric Fontaine patients. So I don't know if someone in the audience knows that pediatric Fontaine patient usually leads to so-called pulmonary plastic bronchitis. You basically generate this plug and in your pulmonary airway or lungs, and they actually literally suffocate the kids with a severe disease. And the investigator actually found out, hey, why don't analyze the plug itself and found out it's fibrin-rich material. Then she went back to the literature and found a drug called the Activates, which is a tissue plasminogen activator, TPA, and people use for stroke as well as a cardiovascular events. And you say, oh, why don't I drip directly instill into this kid's airway system to see if it clears it up? And sure enough, it did. And so she turned around, actually came to initially seek well-funded NIH investigator, seeking advice from us and saying that we really would like to use it for biodefense purpose, because we found that during the literature search, we're seeing a lot of industrial or suffocating agents or stress agents enters into the pulmonary space, into the lung space, and also we actually see those cast formation. And so we say, definitely do some proof of concept studies. So they went back under their grants mechanism and actually generate really nice preliminary results. And one of the issues was this was a $1 billion drug. And we actually helped them to negotiate with the company to transfer part of their knowledge to the drug giant, one of the drug giants that actually produced the drug. And in fact, she runs her program and continue the model development now, her scientific interest. And we actually engage with a company using the sponsor to go to in front of the FDA to actually expand the label indications so that it could potentially benefit both the patient, help with the national preparedness posture, and also gain additional knowledge into this disease area. So I was really proud of that. It's one of the many success stories that one will be able to find between this private partnership, as well as ideology was initiated in an academic institution. And it takes about, since 2014, takes about 6 years to mature. So definitely give some time and approach us early and often, and getting the regulatory recommendation usually is really help you to through the learning curve.
That's great. Do we have any other quick ones to wrap up the panel? And again, just to remind everybody, we're going to have time directly after this to interact with the panelists. Any other success stories to mention, or we're good?
I'll just mention real quickly in terms of pitfalls, and Kelly was really emphasizing this earlier. Don't underestimate the importance of compliance. When it is a major deal to get federal funding, and you've got to be respectful of the process. At some point, an audit will occur. If you're introducing unnecessary risk into your business proposition, it's really going to hurt you down the road for additional financing upon IPO, upon acquisition. So just again, keep your investment banking business hat on and think what that end goal looks like, and try and mitigate that risk.
Great. So we have a success and a potential pitfall to be aware of. And I think that's a wrap for us. So I want to thank all of the panelists. A terrific discussion, and I hope everybody was able to gain some important information from this workshop.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you to you and the panelists for doing such a terrific job of balancing a lot of complex information and explaining it to our audience in a conversational way. And thank you for the audience for your participation.